for me anyway, GuildSomm has been such an important resource. And I know for many other sommeliers who have kind of been through, whether it's studying for the Court of Master Sommeliers or for WSET studies or MW studies, it's such a great reference for so many different things. And as you mentioned, people learn in different ways, right? Whether it's visually or audially or just reading or that kind of thing. And I feel like you guys have so many different opportunities for people to jump into wine.
Ciao, y'all. I'm Jessica Dupuy, guest host for a special TexSom series covering the 2024 TexSom Wine Conference from Dallas, Texas. Join me in the heart of the Lone Star State as we delve into the experiences and insights of key speakers and attendees, exploring career paths, challenges, and the latest trends in the wine industry. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe and rate our show wherever you get your podcasts.
All right. So, Chris Tanghe, welcome to the Italian Wine Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you could be here. We are obviously sitting in Dallas, Texas at TexSom Wine Conference, which is probably the first place we ever met each other. Tell us about you and what you do, which will then lead us into GuildSomm.
Well, I do a lot of things. I work with GuildSomm as the Director of Education. So if anyone's not familiar, it's an online resource for beverage professionals and aficionados that creates content in the form of podcasts, videos, articles. One of our biggest strengths is that we have a compendium of wine law that is updated on the daily. So if you are studying a given region, we comb through all those legal documents and translate everything and then put it in a bite-sized, easily digestible piece of information to make it easy for you. So a lot of people use it for reference for studying and getting their head around the foundations of a given area. But there's other elements too, e-learning, et cetera, et cetera. We produce videos on a given region from time to time. So it's a lot of fun.
And GuildSomm being, short for essentially like Guild of Sommeliers, right?
The name has evolved over time.
Okay, exactly.
So yeah, it
kind of like TexSom has. Yeah.
Yeah, it started as Guild of Sommeliers, which was actually an organization that did a few more things with sponsorships and scholarships, things like that. In 2016, the organization split into two. At that point forward, it was called GuildSomm, short for Guild of Sommeliers. And then there was another organization that was birthed out of that called Somm Foundation, which handles a lot of scholarships and things. So it's just mainly due to tax purposes. A really boring story, but
okay.
But yeah, that was the most effective way to kind of handle the two different prongs of what we did was to actually separate.
Okay. You're a Master Sommelier.
Yeah.
When did you earn that title?
2013.
Okay.
Yeah, which is crazy to think about. It's been that long.
So much. I know, right? Like we were babies one time, but now, not so much. Well, the reason I ask is just because, I feel like for me anyway, GuildSomm has been such an important resource. And I know for many other sommeliers who have kind of been through, whether it's studying for the Court of Master Sommeliers or for WSET studies or MW studies, it's such a great reference for so many different things. And as you mentioned, people learn in different ways, right? Whether it's visually or audially or just reading or that kind of thing. And I feel like you guys have so many different opportunities for people to jump into wine and sometimes other things. Like you'll talk about spirits every once in a while or things like that. But sake, exactly.
Beer.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've tried to cover all the bases in terms of types of beverages, but also, like you said, with mediums of content, because I'm a huge believer that we all have different ways of learning. And like part of the challenge of getting through any of the certifications you mentioned is the first step is learning how you learn.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you have more content to choose from, more types of different forms of content, it can often make it easier. So yeah, that is definitely a super rewarding part of that gig for sure.
So you're Director of Education. If you were to read that job title, what does that mean? You're doing a lot, but how do you contain it all,
Yeah, I do have lots of help. First and foremost, the team's great. I create more of the audio and visual and or in-person content myself. I do have lots of help in the editorial department. So I'll contribute to the ideas around that. But in terms of execution, that actually goes to Stacy Lenberger, who oversees a lot of that editorial content. So pretty much outside of that, that's the content that I oversee. So the podcasts, videos, in-person classes that we teach across the country and actually a little bit internationally as well. So I'll deliver that content or work with folks to deliver that content as well. So I mentor and bring up these other, teachers, not necessarily MSs. We feature other certified folks or not certified. I believe in certifications, but I don't think it's a necessity to be an expert in a field or a good teacher. I think teaching is its own separate skill, totally independent of being an MS or MW or whatever else.
Right.
It's not an easy skill. I think that to me is actually more important as having the knowledge, is being able to speak to people and to make them feel at ease and make them feel like they can ask you questions and make them kind of like break down the barriers that often surround wine, which is something that our generation has been trying to do for years and years and years, is to dispel that snootiness around sommelierdom or wine knowledge, because it is such a massive subject that it often in the past was lorded over, those that had it, lorded it over those that didn't. And that just drove me nuts. And so that is the most important thing for me. And also the most rewarding thing for me in this job is that I get to bring people in and
make it more accessible.
Yeah. It's just fun, man. We're not saving lives here. I mean, I can see we could be a little more, strict about knowledge and testing knowledge if we were like saving lives, if it were medical doctors or whatever. But at the end of the day, we're just making people happy with delicious beverages, whether it be wine or whatever else. So, we have to sometimes take a step back and realize that perspective.
Remember that. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It's an interesting point, and it's funny because I have spoken to a number of different people, whether speakers or people involved with TexSom over the past couple of days. Like, for instance, Vincent Morrow, right? He's with Press Napa and obviously focuses a great deal on Napa Valley wines, right? But he's an MS and was able to study and kind of work his way through that whole process and become knowledgeable about the world of wine. You actually have the luxury of staying fresh on a regular basis because it's kind of your job. I mean, you kind of have to stay in it, which I think is fascinating. I mean, how are you're about to have a webinar, Wine and AI. And I'm actually really curious, how are y'all keeping up with the compendium and stuff like that, with the laws changing and stuff? Is it a team of people, or how are y'all kind of, sticking, and can you integrate AI in that way or trust it? Or
we might be able to in the future. At the moment, we don't. I think that there are some ways to save time, but all the AI experts I have talked to say that there still is no substitute for the human touch in this way, because we need to double check the AI's work basically. And what the AI is drawing from is the internet. And we all hopefully realize at this stage and everything that we read on the internet is true. So I don't foresee it replacing anyone. To speak to your earlier question, it is just really a team of one that does that. We generally have someone that's their sole job or the majority of their job. And they're usually a contractor, to be honest, because I do too many things to have the bandwidth to focus on that. It also takes a very specialized personality to comb through that stuff. And I will say today, in part because of AI, it is easier to translate.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So right now it's Jonathan Eichholz, who is a Master Sommelier out of New York. And he's been great at that. In the past, we've had Jonathan Ross, MS. We've had Vincent doing it. Vincent Morrow, who you mentioned already. We've had a lot of really talented individuals doing it, and it's imperative that we keep up on it. It's one of those things that once you let it slip, it becomes like a crazy big project, right? So we prioritize that really, honestly, above anything else. It's all that work that's done behind the scenes that no one sees, but they know they can go to the GuildSomm site and the compendium and say, this is accurate. Or, sometimes we miss things here and there for sure, but it is a community effort as well. We do have people chime in and say, hey, this changed, or this is a typo or whatever. And we really value that because it is a massive piece of data.
Of course. It's a big world.
It's a big world.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'm glad you mentioned Jonathan, because I do keep up with the podcasts that you guys put out. They keep me interested while I'm driving kids to school and things like that. So I appreciate the one that you and Jonathan just released on tasting. And you guys in the past have done stuff where you'll do a blind tasting between two different sommeliers or wine professionals across the country. But I like that the two of you kind of rehashed, like, what are some of the tips and tricks and what do we need to do to stay fresh and how do we do that? For those listening, let's promote cross podcast here, because I think it's worth just going to that one podcast and listening yourself. But if you don't mind, maybe just kind of sharing a couple of those tips, like how do you stay fresh, or how do you encourage people who are really in the process of trying and not nail for testing, but really understand blind tasting?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I always tell people I'm mentoring them, and first thing I would love to remind your listeners of, is that it's on an exam, whether CMS or WSET or IMW, whatever exam, it's on there for a reason. We often, and when I say the collective we, I mean people that are going through certifications, often start blind tasting and honing the practice because of the exam, which I understand. However, if we take a step back again and realize why it's on the exam in the first place, it actually becomes much less daunting, much more applicable, and tells you that you have to take the long game with your approach to blind tasting. This is not, I'm going to practice blind tasting so I get over this exam. If you're doing that, you're mucking it up. Okay. You're missing the point. And I think it's easy. And I understand, I am guilty of this myself. It's easy to get in that mode, that myopic mode of being like, I got to pass this exam. I got to do this thing. It takes a lot of time and effort and money and la, 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 la. But it actually helps if you step back and say, I'm doing this exam because I want to better myself, because I want to deliver a better experience to my guest, and I want to potentially see some doors open. Let's be honest, that is part of it too.
Right.
However, that is a bonus, really. And that is not guaranteed these days either. Mm-hmm. It is not a golden ticket, okay, at any level of certification for any certifying body. So if we go back to the original pursuit, which is to be better at your everyday job, to understand cause and effect, what's going on with the wine, develop a more accurate lexicon to talk to your guests and create better experiences, you will have a much better success rate. And also a lot more fun blind tasting than just putting the pressure of the exam on. That to me is the most important thing, is to take a step back and realize that.
Right.
Number two is get beyond instinctual tasting, which is totally natural, what we all do at the beginning. But if you continually rely on your instincts to learn typicity and what's going on with the wine, you're never going to truly understand it, because you have to dive into the chemistry, into the winemaking, into the cause and effects of what is creating the certain conditions that make that variety from that place express itself in that way. Mm-hmm. That is the only way you can truly understand it. If you are one of those individuals that has like a smellographic memory, right? Where you, as soon as you smell something, you can recall it, like a Rolodex, like a photographic memory, then good on you. That's a great skill to have. That will help you. However, there is a glass ceiling to that, because once you come across something that either has gone through a pretty quick evolution because of climate change or whatever else, or a new producer you've never had before, or a variety you've never had before, you're going to be totally at a loss because you have no reference point. But if you have done the nitty-gritty hard work, diving into the winemaking and the climate and the chemistry and la, 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 you have some touchstones now to be like, okay, I don't know what this wine is, but this is what's going on with it, because the acid is this, the phenolic character is that, the oxidative nature is showing me this, right? Like there's so many other ways to approach it other than just instinctual recall.
Okay.
So, and it's okay if you're doing that for now. I don't want to come down on anyone doing that. It's natural. That's just part of it. That's where we all start. But we have to push further and deeper in order to really get good at the skill and to really get more out of it in terms of its applicability in real life and its fulfillment in terms of your feeling of accomplishment in really understanding your craft.
Right. It's a very concise way that you're saying that. I very much appreciate it. And I feel like some of the things that you and Jonathan nailed are the idea that like theory is just as important through the tasting process, that it can't just be the magic trick, you know, and like you said, it's fun to do, but if you're really trying to push yourself forward, the understanding of the whys and the hows and the wheres and all of that really, really come into play, especially like you said, because things are changing so quickly. Even, I mean, if you go back to the original grid, whether it's CMS or WSET, IMW, we shouldn't be talking about old world versus new world anymore. Like that we kind of have to change that lexicon too, either because, as you mentioned earlier today, which we'll talk about in a second, the fact that new world regions have been producing wines in some ways just as long, if not longer, than some European regions, right? Like, so how do we really say new versus old or whatever? You actually learn more when you get it wrong, because you should not just be upset that you got it wrong and move on to the next day, but you should take what happened and really break that down and think about it. Like, what do I know about this wine now that I have seen the actual label? Okay, where did I go wrong? And that's going to make you a stronger taster.
Yeah. And I think to reinforce the fact that it's perfectly okay to be wrong. Again, we're not saving lives here. We're talking about wine. And so actually you tend to learn more when you are wrong. Like you said, you dive into it because we're all competitive creatures at heart, right? Or at least most of us. So when you get it wrong, it's frustrating. And you're like, no, I want to be right. We always want to be right, whether it's wine or something else, unless we've finally learned that lesson that it's okay to be wrong with maybe, experience and age.
Yeah.
But I will assure you that once you let go, the bigger part is the anxiety that goes with it. Yeah. So once you let go of this need to be right, not only when you learn more, because you will dive into it. When we're right, we tend to just be like, I'm the best. I won the day. Let's move on. You don't actually go back and reevaluate and say, okay, I got that right, but what did I miss? Right. You only do that when you're wrong. So that's one benefit of being wrong. But the other one is just to let go of that anxiety of like having to be right when it comes around to blind tasting. And I think the culture around this has gotten a lot better in the last few, years. But when I was coming up, it was like, man, if you were wrong, like it was really stressful.
You lose sleep. I'm like the stupidest person. Why am I doing this? Yeah, you question life.
I mean, you do all these insane things. It's like, wait a minute, because I didn't understand what was going on with the wine. And we have to go back to the point of like, it's not about being right and wrong. It's about understanding the wine, right? Yeah. And so you can appreciate it more, so you can apply it better. Those are the real goals. The false goal is that you have to be right to be right.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. Let's shift just a little bit, because we are at TexSom, which is a place that, this conference has really pushed education and growth and development within the wine industry for wine professionals at all levels. And you were giving a presentation today. Do you want to recap what that was?
Yeah, it was called Australian Classics: Perspective on Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. I love this topic because it is one that isn't considered very often when you hear the words Pinot Noir and Chardonnay and classic, maybe. But I assure you that the country has been producing amazing examples of those varieties for decades and decades and decades, working on in earnest since the late 70s into the 80s, 1980s, right? Yeah. And so that's a long time, right? I mean, that's almost 50 years of work that's been put in. And yes, it's not thousands of years that Burgundy has, for instance. However, it's much different landscape these days to pursue excellence in a variety in a given place, because we have so much more know-how and technology and everything at our fingertips. And so real work can be done and real accomplishment can be made in a period of even half of that, to be honest, in 25 years. And so, Australia's always fought the stigma of being really ripe, gloopy Shiraz and, bulk wine to some degree. And I think that's not super fair, because to go back to your old world, new world thing, they've had, serious vine plantings there since the early 19th century, pursuing wine at a very high level even then. And because of the image of a few brands like that somehow tarnish like an entire, a couple hundred years worth of effort is kind of insane to me. I think that's one aspect. The other one is that they think it's all hot all the time, when it's a really big country with lots of different climates and a lot of areas that are along like a really cool, cold ocean. Right. And it's not all like the hot, dry desert type scenario that you'd find in a couple areas. Really,
Right.
a lot of it actually is pretty temperate.
Yeah.
And it's a big country, roughly the size of the US. So just kind of opening people's eyes to the fact that these varieties can really thrive there. Really classic examples. And I even went a step further to say that there is like such a remarkable kind of typicity and almost unique character to those wines, which is a little bit crazy to say with a couple of varieties that grow around the world. But I think honestly, they achieve it more succinctly than a lot of other areas that are making the same efforts. And not to belittle anyone's efforts towards those varieties, but I think that really Australia has nailed it with these varieties made in specific styles, because they've have this mentality that they're like, we're going to really have a go at this, as they would say, right?
Yeah.
Like they are extremely humble about a lot of different wines that they make, when they really do bring to the table some unique expressions, you know, like I brought up in the seminar, Hunter Valley Semillon, crazy unique expression. Rutherglen, Topakes, and all of that, amazingly unique expressions. Parts of the Barossa doing not only Shiraz that would really surprise you, but Grenache that is coming from some of the oldest vines on the planet and some of the best examples of Grenache.
Right.
So there's no reason why they can't do it with Pinot Noir, Chardonnay. And my argument is that they are doing it with those wines. And I think it showed in the tasting. We had 8 wines, 4 Chardonnay, 4 Pinot. Were there a couple outliers? I think there's one real outlier. And that wasn't because it wasn't a good wine. It just was a different approach.
Exactly.
And I think that
it was the Chardonnay
it was the Chardonnay from Gippsland, from Patrick Sullivan. And, you know, that's cool. I love seeing that. And I think that there are other outside expressions. I mean, you go to Burgundy, there's lots of different outside expressions, right? Yeah. But I think as a whole, there's a current running through those wines, whether they were from Western Australia or Victoria, which is not a, short distance between, to show that there is like an Australian approach to these varieties, and there is typicity to a degree. And I think once you taste more of them, you definitely see typicity within those more specific areas. But I think even as a whole, like there's a lot to unpack there that you will not see elsewhere.
Yeah. It's an interesting point. You're exactly right. So especially if you're thinking theory, like when you're thinking about Chardonnays, you hit, the regions, Burgundy, maybe Oregon, California, obviously, you're thinking of the places where am I going to get classic or benchmark Chardonnay, right? So for Pinot Noir, similar thing, Burgundy, Oregon, maybe even New Zealand for Central Otago, things like that. But I'm curious, and as you learn to taste and you learn to kind of build your own personal lexicon and your own grid, those different places and terroirs start to fill out in your brain with different characteristics or different, structural components or things like that. How or what are some things that, you would say help or are helping to define what we're seeing in Australia from Chardonnay and Pinot Noir?
Yeah, I think it's very clear with Chardonnay in that if you do a little of the deep dive we mentioned earlier about tasting and look at the chemistry is wild with Aussie Chardonnay.
Yeah.
They have the incredible ability to get real high phenolic ripeness along with pretty low sugar accumulation and insanely low pHs and high TAs. And you would read those stats on paper and be like, this wine is going to be terrible, right?
Yeah, right.
It sounds like it's going to be lean and mean and like basically Von
aggressive. Yeah.
For meaning the first round of fermentation for a sparkling wine in a marginal climate. But in fact, they are super generous in terms of fruit and complete and really just delicious. It just doesn't compute when you look at a lot of other regions, like if you look at Chablis, you can get similar numbers, but you're not going to get quite the same expressions. And I'm not dogging Chablis. I love Chablis, but you look at California, you're going to see way higher pHs, lower TAs, even in some cases utilizing the same variety or clone of, what in areas they call Gin in Australia, which is loosely related to Wente, which is what we see throughout a lot of heritage plantings in California. So yeah, I think that's the most unique factor for me is like gaining this amazing phenolic. And when I say phenolic, people, I'm just saying like all the flavors, right? Like
everything is developing. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Not just the structural elements of sugar and things like that, but actually like the chemical compounds in the skins and elsewhere that are developing and becoming more complex and more numerous through the ripening of the grape berry itself. So that to me is like the most remarkable thing, is that amazing ripeness, but with such focus and drive and like
complete development,
development without losing the sharp edge,
right?
That Chardonnay I think should have.
Yes.
And too often we see it just kind of go, and then even the fruit's not that interesting. It's just like, it's a really interesting variety because it's like, or wacky variety, I should say, because it's so wildly different from place to place, even within a relatively small geographical zone. And then also you add the complexities of the handling with the winemaking and all that stuff. And it can just be so crazy different, I mean, that's why the whole ABC thing is so funny to me. Anything but Chardonnay Club, that was ubiquitous like years ago.
Yeah.
But and I think we've all realized this now, especially as professionals, maybe not as consumers. And is that Chardonnay, like you can find a Chardonnay for someone
that someone will love,
right? Like, because they are just so wildly different. So Pinot is a little bit harder to say that this is the thing, but I feel like there is a current through a lot of them that express themselves in this kind of purity of fruit. And I think also part of it is because a lot of winemakers aren't taking an extreme position in their approach, meaning that we often see dogmatic approaches to Pinot Noir production. Oh, I only do a whole cluster, right? Or I only use this particular clone, this and this and that. And I feel like also that ripening ability that we talk about with Chardonnay only helps them to gain some more consistency, because there's definitely folks that like, and I love Sonoma and West Sonoma Coast, but there's definitely been examples from there, especially in early days, where it's like, wow, this thing is thin and weedy and really stemmy, is because it's like, well, we're going to pick at, 11.5% and we're going to do all whole cluster and we're going to do this. And it's just like, they're not actually listening to the wine or the vineyard, I should say, not the wine, but the vineyard.
Yeah.
They're just following kind of a recipe that, at that time was pretty trendy.
Yeah.
Right. Like whole cluster or die type thing and lower alcohol. Now, some of this was misconstrued because of the misunderstood messages from IPOB and other things like that. So I understand why it happened, but I feel like Australia has kind of always done their own thing. As I mentioned in the seminar, they haven't been chasing the dragon, which means like, to me, they're not trying to be someone else. They're just trying to figure out how to make the best wine that they can in their place. And of course, there are exceptions. People are following that dogmatic approach, but not like we saw wholesale in a lot of other places in the U.S. or elsewhere,
which we won't mention.
It's fine.
Yeah.
I'm not dogging those places. I just think that we do silly things sometimes in the pursuit of
trying to gain credibility on a global market.
On a global market, or with a certain demographic, or with a certain publication.
Sure.
Right. I think those things matter less now, but 10 years ago, they mattered a lot.
For sure.
And I think people are more comfortable doing their own thing these days, whether it be from a production standpoint or a consumer standpoint. And so I think that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
But I feel like Australia, while a lot of people would say, oh no, they leaned into the super ripe, blah, blah, this and this and that. Okay, for a certain category, some of them did. But we have to remember, not all of them did. Yeah. And what we see here is a fraction of what is actually made over there.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but I feel like with the Pinot Noir and Chardonnay topic, they actually didn't do that because it wasn't the main thing. It wasn't the easy sell.
It's kind of skated under the radar in that sense, right? For that particular conversation anyway.
Yeah, because those varieties grow everywhere, right? Like, and a lot of people have seen success with them for various reasons or at various stages. It's like, why would they want to compete with that? People were doing it there because they wanted to do it.
Yeah.
They loved the varieties. They were inspired by other things they tasted. So they did it. It wasn't because it was a cash cow or anything like that. Exactly. How could you compete with, KJ Chard, Reserve Chard, or La Crema? Like, right. And again, nothing against that one. I'm just saying, like, they kind of cornered the market on that and did a very particular, were super smart about it and did a very particular thing at a particular moment. Like, why would roughly at that same time, and when I'm saying at the same time, I mean like the 90s, why would Australia try to compete with that? and it just doesn't make any sense.
Exactly.
Right? They're doing it because they loved it. And I really respect that.
Well, I took a lot out of that seminar. I didn't actually expect to. I was like, where's he going to go with this?
Yeah.
Which is sometimes why I sign up for the different seminars when the whole list comes out. So I'm grateful for that. Thank you. The wines were delicious. And so I would definitely encourage others to check out more Australian Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. And thank you so much for joining us for the podcast. And thank you for coming to TexSom again. I know it's been a little while.
It has. Yeah, it feels good to be back.
It's nice. It I've talked to other people. It feels like this reunion, this sort of homecoming. So
yeah,
it's a nice time of year. But thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Listen to the Italian Wine Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We're on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Himalaya FM, and more. Don't forget to subscribe and rate the show. If you enjoy listening, please consider donating through ItalianWinePodcast.com. Any amount helps cover equipment, production, and publication costs. Until next time, cin cin.